Hello and welcome to another home edition of Tullahoma's Cooking. I'm your host, Kelly Lepchinsky, and today we're going to be making an icon of retail cooking. That's right. I don't know if you heard the news this week, but while we're still on lockdown, big box retailer IKEA released the recipe for its Swedish meatballs. Now, that's what we're going to be making today, and I'll tell you why. Many years ago, when I lived in Southern California, if you wanted to buy something for your home, something that you needed that wasn't necessarily groceries, you didn't go to Walmart. You went to one of two places. You either went to Costco or you went to IKEA. Now, both of these places had cafes to serve their customers, and Costco is famous for its generous slice of pizza. But IKEA is famous for its Swedish meatballs. Now, the minute that recipe came out this week, I knew that's what we were going to be doing here. And if you haven't been to an IKEA, because from Tullahoma, the nearest one is a good hour's drive, let me put it to you this way. If you went to Tullahoma High School and you ever had a fiestada and you liked it, and it's been years since you've been to high school, but you still every once in a while just think about that fiestada and wish you had one, that's the same staying power that these Swedish meatballs have. So we're going to be doing those today. Now, I have been trying to test kitchen the fiestada, working on a memory that is a couple decades old. And I haven't gotten there yet, but because I've been trying that, I did happen to have the ground pork that this recipe needs already in the house. So let's take a look at what this recipe requires. Now we need a pound of ground beef and a half a pound of ground pork. And we're just going to put those into a mixing bowl that will accept both of them, and mix them together very well until you're pretty sure that you've got a little bit of beef, a little bit of pork anywhere in this mixture. Now, I did wash my hands before we went on camera, and if you've seen these episodes enough, I think you can be pretty confident that I did do that. Oh, but what a mess that is going to make to my hands, because we do have some other ingredients we need to mix together, and I might have started with those first. Let me go ahead, because we're going to have to mix those in. So you're going to see me wash my hands now. Get some of this ground meat off of my hands. And we've got onion and garlic that need to go in here. Now, this recipe calls for 1 clove of garlic. And I'll tell you, usually if a recipe tells me 1 clove of garlic, I laugh in its face, ha, and say, no, we're using far more than that. But as I mentioned, these are iconic, and therefore I'm not going to mess with their recipe too much at all, because I really want to know how close this comes when you do it at home, doing exactly what they tell you to do. So I'm just going to chop up the 1 clove of garlic here. Okay, get that little bit more fine. More of a mince than a dice, I guess, on this one. And if you're only using one, make sure it goes all the way through and you can incorporate it quite well. And I do have my little device this time. It also calls for 1 onion finely chopped. Now, I buy really large onions, and I've said this in previous episodes, it doesn't specify which onion to use. I happen to like and use quite frequently white onions, but if you prefer a yellow onion, I don't see any reason you couldn't go with that. I sort of wish, because we're trying to be so precise to their recipe, that they had specified, but they did not. Now I'm going to make a hatchet job of these onions, just so that you don't have to watch me cut them for a half an hour. If I'd thought about it, I might have done that first, but there's no backing up now. We've already minced up our meat. All right, so what we're also going to have in these meatballs is we've got some breadcrumb over there, and we've got some egg over there. And those are going to go right into our meatball mixture as well. Now, yeah, total hatchet job on this, guys. Just give it a little more care and love when you're at home doing this yourself, all right? Okay, we'll come back to that. I want to get to our egg and our breadcrumbs. 1 egg, which I've already put at room temperature, as you know. Big deal for me, room temperature egg. And we're gonna whisk that up just a little bit before we add our breadcrumbs to it. Now this recipe was written with grams and milliliters. I've done the equivalencies for you. They're not precise, but they're close enough using regular measurements that we're going to be familiar with. So breadcrumbs came out to about 1/2 cup. I'm going to put that directly into my egg there. And then milk is the ingredient that really, I don't remember how it had it listed, the number of milliliters, but it came out to 5 tablespoons, which is 1/4 cup plus a tablespoon. It just so happens these little ramekins that I use for my seasonings hold 5 tablespoons. So my milk is already pre-measured into this ramekin right here. And we'll just incorporate that into our breadcrumb mixture as well. I don't know why I'm not adding that right to the meat. It's probably because I didn't finish the onions and I just went into this bowl instead, but I don't think it's going to matter. It's all going the same place. All right, so what we've got here is a little egg, breadcrumb, milk mixture. Again, that I think you could probably very easily have done right into the meat, should you prefer. I didn't think so much about how much onion I was going to have to cut here on camera. We got our meat and our beef getting ready to go there. And we'll just take some of those bigger pieces and not use them, because really, depending on the size of the onion you use, I mean, you can see realistically that could have been right there a much smaller onion than the one that I had already cut in half. So we're just gonna, do our best to get some smaller dices out of that onion and throw in what is already the right size and save the rest of that for a little finer cutting at a later time. All right. We got a good dice in there. Yeah. All right, let's start using some of this guy. And you can always judge too, looking at how much meat you've got in the bowl. I've got a pretty good amount of meat there. How much onion did that cover? How much garlic is in there? And that may be right there. I may not even want to add more garlic. I'm a big fan of garlic, more onion. I actually am a big fan of onion. I'm going to pick just a little bit more. I've got pretty large slices, obviously, right now, and I'm leaving the largest of them out. So they may be a little more difficult to incorporate than the finely chopped onion that the recipe called for. I do recommend getting a finer chop than I just did here for the purposes of keeping this episode under 3 hours. Okay, so in this case, once again, we've got a little bit bigger onion than we necessarily want to work with. I think in the end we'll be okay, but if you do this at home, don't rush the onion so much. Now, a fork is not necessarily the right choice for that, so I'm just going to go ahead and stick my hands in here. Or instead, my handy dandy rubber scraper. Much easier. There we go. And get all that right down in there with our meat. And just mix with your hands. There's really no reason not to do this with your hands. You're going to be making the balls with your hands when it comes down to it anyway. So just trying to get that all good and mixed in. Now, you also got a little bit of seasoning, a little salt and pepper, and it did not measure out the salt and pepper. It suggested just, sort of add salt and pepper, season your food. Whenever I don't have a pre-measured amount of salt and pepper that's called for in a recipe, a good starting spot is always 1/4 of a teaspoon. So I have 1/4 teaspoon pepper and 1/4 teaspoon salt, pre-measured and good to go. And we'll start mixing those guys in there too. All right, we want to make sure that those get mixed around in there as well. So, you're sort of at this point, I guess if you made any other meatball or a meatloaf, you're familiar with this process here. The next part of the step, though, next part of the organization process is to make them into meaty balls. Now, I have made a mess, and I'm going to continue making a mess because this is some messy stuff. Oh boy. All right, so when you make your meatballs, you're going to want to put them into something that you can cover and refrigerate for 2 hours. You want to make these into balls that can sit and sort of come together and create, again, a cohesive unit. And I picked this pan here because it has a cover that's a part of it. Now, you may notice I also have my Lodge pan here for when we go into the oven later. So why am I not just going to make the meatballs and put them directly into this casserole dish, which obviously can go into an oven, or directly into the Lodge, which will be going into the oven? Why am I not using the same pot for both? Well, thermal shock is the answer to that. In about 2 hours, when these have had their time to rest in the refrigerator, the pan that they're in will also be cold. Now, I don't know the average temperature of your home refrigerator. What I do know is that it's cooler than your average room temperature and not so cold as freezing. So we're going to narrow that down. We know it's higher than 32. We know it's lower than 68. Let's just make the math easy and say 50 degrees. Well, we're going to take this out of 50-degree environment and put it into a 350-degree environment. That rapid change of 300 degrees, your pans probably can withstand that, but they're meant to go a little more gradually from cold to hot. And particularly with the Lodge pan, which is enameled on the inside, you risk crazing. You risk not ruining the pan, but ruining certainly the visual of the pan, and just causing some unattractive damage. So we're going to have one pan that goes into the refrigerator for cooling purposes and one that comes out and goes into the oven for cooking purposes. Now you just start making meatballs, and there's really no guideline on the recipe to how big those meatballs should be. Actually, they're relatively small at IKEA. So, I would think golf ball size is about what you want to aim for. I'm going to probably go just a little bit bigger than that because they're going to cook down a little bit. I mean, just like a meatloaf shrinks in the pan, they're going to shrink a little bit when some of that fat cooks off. So I'm going to leave them right about there. And the recipe says you should be able to come out with about 16 to 20 of those. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make 16 to 20 of those. And we will see on the back side how many I actually come out with, because I'm not going to make you watch that. We're going to go to commercial break, and I'll be back when we have these ready to go into a pan after a good 2-hour resting period. So we'll see you then. Welcome back to Tullahoma's Cooking, and we are working on our IKEA Swedish meatballs. Now, we made the meatballs about 2 hours ago and set them in the refrigerator to cool. Now, what you didn't see me do, because I didn't know I was going to do this until I set them in here, is that it ended up making 16 meatballs, but they didn't all fit next to each other in this dish that I wanted to put in the refrigerator. So I used a lining of wax paper just to make 2 tiers of meatballs that could go into the refrigerator. So there you go. We've got 8 right there, another 8 on the bottom layer right here. And what we're going to do now is we're going to brown these before they go into the oven. Now, I've got my oven coming up to heat at 350 degrees. I've also, while we were waiting, just before we came back, cut up some potatoes to make some mashed potatoes that will go with our meatballs when they come out of the oven. Now, they only take about a half an hour in the oven, so I figured I'd get my potatoes going. They'd come up to boil, hopefully a little bit after I put the meatballs in, so I can then mix in my milk and butter and have the mashed potatoes ready when the meatballs come out. We'll see how well I timed that here in a minute. But now, this is going to be a tricky part for me. This isn't something I normally do. Meatballs are an interesting feat for me. I read a little tip that instead of having them completely round, make them just a little bit oblong and just a little bit flat on the side. Not flat like a hamburger flat, just a little bit short of round, so that there's a little bit more surface area. And I'm not sure I want to reach right into that hot oil. I've just got that oil on medium. Okay, so I'm just going to oblong these a little bit. Let's see here. Yeah, that's all right. Not too bad. Just make it, again, oblong and stick them in. And you want them to have about 2 minutes on a side. Now, granted, they're round, so what's a side? We're just going to follow along, and we don't have to cook them all the way through. They're going to go into the oven, but we do want them browned just to get a little bit of extra flavor on that outside coating. So just a little oblong, throw it in there. A little bit oblong, get it in there. And I think I'll do them in 2 batches. I think I'll go ahead and do them just like I put them in the fridge in 2 tiers. I'll go ahead and do them 8 at a time. All right. So we're just looking for a little bit of browning here. Now, I've lined my enamel pan. I will not obviously want that paper towel in there when I put it in the oven, but I do want to be able to catch some of this grease when I take the first batch out and I take the second batch before I put them into the oven. I do want to catch some of the grease that comes off of them from this process. So I'm just going to put them directly in there on top of the paper towel. We'll get that paper towel back out in just a little bit. Now, yeah, you could, okay, we're already starting to see a little bit of browning on the ones I put in first. Not entirely. I think this one was last, yeah. Like I said, we're on about a medium heat. And just a low level of oil, just enough to really coat the bottom of the pan and give it just a little bit of depth, but not make it more than wet. But don't really give it any depth at all. Okay. Now if I turn this so you can see it, hopefully, you'll see we're getting some browning on the oblong side that has been down in the heat. We just need to turn them and give them a chance to do that all the way around. Okay. Now for the mashed potatoes, I'll talk about the mashed potatoes a little bit while you're waiting for this process to happen. Usually for a good serving of mashed potatoes, I'll take russet potatoes. I happen to like mine with russets. I know a lot of people like Yukon Gold. I like the starchiness and the way that a russet just falls apart when it's ready to go. Usually I will use 4 good baking potato russet potatoes. If you buy them in a bag, they're generally smaller. You might get that one large one that's thrown into the bag that gives you something to compare by. So it may take up to 8. Now, I've never measured them. I can't give you by weight. I know that in this case, I had bought a bag of potatoes. I couldn't find the individual loose potatoes the last time I went out. So it took about 2 of these smaller potatoes to equal the size of 1 good baking potato. So there's about 8 potatoes in here that I have just quartered. And I've got them in there. They're down on medium as well because this is going to take a minute. But I'm going to bring them up to just a short boil, not a rolling boil, just a medium boil, and let them cook until they're tender. Now, they might take about 30 minutes to do that, so I didn't want to start them at the same time these went into the oven, because then I'd have to be mashing and preparing the potatoes when the meatballs were coming out and we were ready to have them to serve. Okay? Now, when the potatoes are ready to mash, I will drain the water and add in fact, I will have, while the potatoes are in a strainer draining, I will put milk and butter into the pan and get it warm. I'm already getting them at room temperature, as you can see. I will get the milk and butter warm. And then I'll take it back out of the pan so that I can add it in the amount that I want. I want it warm, but I don't want to put the potatoes right back in on top of that because it might be more liquid than we really need. So I'll get that warm milk and butter back out of the pan, and make sure you do that into a dish that can handle something that's already hot. And then I'll put the potatoes back in the pan, put the pan on low, and just mix in a little bit at a time that butter and milk. And just until it's the consistency you want when you're mixing it up. And the reason I'm telling you about the potatoes right now is because we're not going to see that on camera. I'm going to do that part while our meatballs, and these are good and brown all the way around, so we're going to go to the next batch. I'm going to do the potatoes off camera so that they're ready to plate when the meatballs come out of the oven. And as you know, we'll take a commercial break when they are in the oven. And I've got one that's coming a little bit apart on me there. But yeah, overall, we got a nice browning of the meatballs. That's the first batch. Okay. We'll do that for a second batch now. Little bit oblong. Just do that 8 more times like we did. Now, once we've got these all into our oven-safe pan that does have a lid, we'll just be putting that pan without the paper towel directly into our 350-degree oven. And it doesn't call for anything to go in there with them, just the meatballs in an oven-safe pan with a lid for 30 minutes. So I think now you've seen this process already. So you know what we're looking for. I'm going to once again take that paper towel out before I put those in the oven. But that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to finish this batch, get that paper towel out of there, put all 16 of these guys into the oven, cook them for a half an hour. And then when they come out, I should have these baked potato or the mashed potatoes ready. And then we'll make the last component of the signature IKEA meatballs, which is the iconic sauce. So I'll get this done. They'll be in there for about a half an hour. We'll come back. See you then. Welcome back to Tullahoma's Cooking. We are about to take our meatballs out of the oven. Now I have made that whipped potatoes, and here we go. Make some room over here on the burner. All right, let's see what we got. Ooh, they look pretty good. I don't know how much they look like IKEA's. I gotta tell you, I made mine a little bit bigger, but taste is gonna be what matters here. So, working on a little experimental sauce. It's probably not gonna come out there. We'll see what happens here. But the real sauce, the IKEA sauce, is what we're gonna work on now. So let me bring my counter back in. All right. Now, the recipe calls for 3 tablespoons of butter. And we're going to put this on make sure I'm turning up the right pan here. Just on a medium heat. All right. And it doesn't say to make a roux, but it does say 3 tablespoons of butter and 3 tablespoons of flour. And it lists both of those ingredients to stir together and cook the flour before you add anything else. So that's, and I'm going to use my whisk to sort of help me break that up and speed up the process a little bit here. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to get our butter in there, get it melted, and then we're going to add the flour and just cook these 2 ingredients until the flour is cooked through. Now that's going to take us a little bit, so let me tell you what I was doing over here. Not sure how that's going to come out. When you go to IKEA, when they serve you their mashed potatoes and their Swedish meatballs, they also serve a side of vegetable. They serve a whole plate here. I mean, really, you're going shopping and getting a full meal. But there's also a lingonberry sauce. Now, that is not only not something I have in the house, that's not something I think I could find at a local grocery store. It's a very Scandinavian side dish. Like we have cranberries with Thanksgiving, lingonberries are that same kind of a tart red berry sauce. Just a little bit of sweetness. So I thought I would try to sort of reduce a tart jelly that I do have in the house. And what I have is a Myers lemon and blood orange jelly. Now what I didn't realize when I bought that was that it's a Meyer lemon and blood orange pepper jelly. So I cooked it down just a little bit to break up the jam, added a little bit of water, and then filtered out the red pepper flakes, basically, that were in there. I don't know what they were. They were some sort of red pepper solids. And I just strained those out, put it back on the heat, and added a bit of sugar because it really, really was a very hot jelly. Really good with like a charcuterie plate with cheeses, but not necessarily, maybe a little bit too hot for what we're doing here. So I added a little bit of sugar in there as well. Now I think I've taken it completely off the heat to let it come back to a semi-solid to make it along the lines of the cranberry or lingonberry sauce that you would get here. Okay, we've got our butter and our flour cooked. And I'm going to just take that off the heat while I talk about this next part. This is 2 ingredients that I've already mixed together, but they're 3/4 cup of each. It called for vegetable stock and beef stock. So 3/4 cups of each, or 1.5 cups total. And I'll get that back on the heat now, but I didn't want to burn my flour while I was talking to you. All right, so we'll get that in there with our flour and our butter. Now the last 2 ingredients that I have waiting to go into the sauce, and I feel like I should probably check the recipe here. I feel like there's maybe something I'm forgetting. Let me just check the recipe. We've got veg stock, heavy cream, 3/4 cup of heavy cream, and I didn't even get that out of the refrigerator, so that's gonna be a treat here just in a second. Let me take that off the heat real quick while I reach into the fridge. Haven't done that before on the home edition. All right, I feel a little bit like Elton Brown. I need Elton, yes. I think I said it wrong in a previous episode. Okay, 3/4 cup. I have this really great measuring cup set that, well, this one, 3/4 cup you get anyway, but I have this really great measuring cup set I'll tell you about anyway, that doesn't just give you 1/4 cups, it gives you 1/8 of a cup. So instead of having, your 4 standard measuring cups, I have a set of 8. Love those guys. All right, so I need 3/4 of a cup, and I'm glad I looked. I posted the recipe here where I could take a look at it if I needed to, and sure enough, I do. Heavy cream is something that I did have to run out for. I told you that we were not doing any non-essential grocery stops, but I actually had an essential need to go shopping. So while I was out, oh my goodness, could this take a little bit longer on camera? It's got a pull tab, but it does not want to pull. Okay, anyway, so while I was out doing some essential shopping, I grabbed the heavy cream I would need for this recipe. And it does not want to open. All right. Good times, great oldies. I was debating there whether I would just edit that out later, but hey, it's real time, it's real cooking, it's real kitchen. Here's where we are. 3/4 of a cup of heavy cream, and oh my goodness, that oven is so warm. All right, so that's just going to go right into our sauce. And because there's a little bit of that sticking to the cup, instead of trying to scrape that out, I'm just going to compensate for it. Yeah, just a little more in. Okay. Now, the other 2 ingredients remaining to go in are a soy sauce, yes, and a Dijon mustard. But here's the thing. Even though I did go out to buy that heavy cream, I didn't buy Dijon mustard while I was out because this recipe only calls for, I think it's a teaspoon of it. And I didn't see the need to spend the money on a teaspoon of Dijon mustard when you can make a really simple substitute at home. And because it's such a small amount, the fact that it's not going to be exact to Dijon mustard isn't going to matter because you're not going to taste a lot of it to start with. So what I did, I had mustard powder in the house, but I also had spicy brown mustard prepared. And the brown mustard seed is a little closer to what's actually in Dijon. So I used my spicy brown mustard, about a tablespoon. And then I matched that amount with mayonnaise, so another tablespoon. And so I've got a mustard and mayonnaise concoction here. And then I added just a little bit of apple cider vinegar. And it wasn't much. It was under a tablespoon. It may have just been a teaspoon. But you can find that substitute. Just look up. Whenever you have an ingredient you don't have, the internet's a great resource for if you don't know these substitutions, look it up. There are all kinds of different ways that you can fake a Dijon. This is the way I chose to do it. I think it also took a little bit of water. Okay. So I just need a teaspoon of this that I have made. And that's our Dijon substitute. Now again, it's pretty viscous. It's sticking to the spoon. So I'm just going to put in a little extra to compensate. All right. And that was loud. I've done a lot of cooking in here today and my sink's piling up. So now we've got our flour, our butter, our cream. We've got our Dijon. We need our soy sauce. And that's this right here. And let me double check here. We've got, this was a two teaspoons of soy sauce. Okay. Usually I don't consult the recipe so rigidly, but like I said, apart from my substitution for the Dijon, we're trying to be really close to IKEA here to see how that recipe comes out at home. So I want to make absolutely sure I'm telling you the right thing, as well as we talked about earlier, those conversions took a little bit of doing. Now, I'm guessing, it doesn't say, now if you've ever bought IKEA furniture, it comes in this flat pack with designs. The instructions are, a little caricature person and one little picture that doesn't tell you a heck of a lot. You just sort of follow along. Well, that's sort of what the recipe here was. And it doesn't say to let this thicken, but let me tell you right now, that looks like too wet a sauce. Now I use the right amount of flour, okay, veg stock, beef stock, heavy cream, soy sauce, Dijon, bring to a simmer. There you go. There's an instruction we hadn't gotten to yet. So I'm going to bring that to a simmer and allow to thicken. There you have it. So while these are resting, while I'm bringing this to a simmer and letting it thicken, I think we'll take one more commercial break. And when we come back and this is good and thick, we'll go ahead and plate and see what we got right after this. Okay guys, welcome back to Tullahoma Cooking, and it is the moment of truth. We have got our potatoes nice and whipped to a nice peak, if you can see there. They're good to go. We have got our meatballs that have cooked for the half an hour after they were browned. We've got the IKEA sauce, which I have to tell you looks a little bit light from my memory of it, but I do remember it having a somewhat of a peachy color, so that's probably good. That's probably right. And then my attempt at making a lingonberry sub. So I'm going to put that on the plate. I've already got some veggies on the plate. I'm going to put that substitute sauce on there first. I'm going to put a little bit of our meatball sauce on there, on the other side. See what we got. Well, where have my tongs gone? Here they are. And let's see, let's pick out about 4 of these guys. Now I did make them a little bit bigger. The recipe said it would make 16 to 20. I made 16. But as I mentioned at the time I was rolling them, these do look bigger than the meatballs you get at IKEA. Okay. Oh, you know what I didn't leave room for? The potatoes. We need the potatoes on this plate. Don't we? Yes, we do. And get that masher out of there. Let's give us a nice scoop of whipped potato there. Right there. All right. And then drizzle a little more of the sauce right over the meatballs, because that is the way they are served. Okay, looks pretty good. Now let's see how close we came. Now, it's been a good decade for me since I've been to IKEA, so I could be fooled pretty easily here. We're going to give this a little taste. All right. It's a very good meatball. That is a very good meatball. I feel like it's missing a little something that made it more craveable and memorable. And almost always, if I say a dish is missing something, you want to see me put a little salt and a little pepper on it. Okay. I'm not sure how much that's going to do, but let's give it a try. Always helps. And of course, just because I'm curious, let's see what happened with that Meyer lemon and blood orange sauce. That actually came out pretty good. For an experiment, that's pretty good. One of the things that's always nice when you get that lingonberry sauce with the meatball is that you give that little bit of that savory with that sweet. So I'm actually going to be a little more courageous with that now and put it right there by the meatballs so you get both. And that's dinner. IKEA Swedish meatballs. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you'll join us next time right here on Tullahoma's Cooking. Thanks for watching. Hergy, burgy, hergy, burgy, burr, Heidi, dee, bark, bark, bark.